All right, we are back. It's Thursday, December 4th. My name is David, aka Kimba, aka Christian, alongside.
Soup.
Yeah, this is the It's Your Perspective talk show. And tonight, as we continue on here, we have author Gary James in the studio. Welcome back again. There he is. He's streaming out right now.
Pleased to be here, brothers.
Yes, I thank you for coming in and gracing us again with your presence. You know.
Yeah, tonight, as I put here on the screen, it says his conversation continues. And I know it was 2 weeks back, and I know you were kind of into many things, but I guess tonight is just sort of the continuation, right?
Yeah, I want to perhaps put a cap on some of the political points we discussed during the previous show.
Right.
But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about economics, the economics of politics, and economics in the black community in general. There is no appreciable economy in the black community, of the VI and in the States, for that matter. Black folk or black people have spending power and consumer power, but have no real economy that circulates dollars among black folk in the black community. Many reasons contribute to the lack of an economy in the black community. Perhaps most of all is the fact that there is no appreciable business economy in the black community. At least none to speak of. Of course, we have a few people in business, generally ma and pa stuff. And of course, you got cutting edge businesses with younger guys like Soup and David, for example. But for the most part, business is the short suit of black folk, no matter where we are. And there is a general disposition to be wage earners and employees. And the information for wage earners and employees to operate is different from the information necessary for you to operate as a successful business person or entrepreneur. So the difference in the information is important. But obviously we need more small businesses and entrepreneurs in order to grow a business culture in the black community. And in order to do that, we need to move beyond certain stereotypes and broaden our thinking about economics and politics, because they're both are particularly relevant. And they both could use some improvement in terms of how we deal with it. But going into business is an idea that many folks consider in the black community, but there is not too much information available to those of us who are interested in exploring a business experience. And if a person ultimately moves beyond the admonition of many friends and families telling them that they should get a real job. If you move beyond the job mentality and seek a business experience, there is relatively little information out there for you to make that transition. There's only some conventional information for a business startup, and the conventional information for the most part doesn't really bring the business seeker up to speed with how it's done. So obviously we need capital to finance a business idea, but we have a little limited information relative to acquiring the kind of capital necessary to start a business. So I'm going to briefly talk about 4 types of capital that is necessary or that is typical for entry-level business opportunities. That is, the 4 types of capital are debt capital, equity capital, venture capital, and angel capital. The first stereotypical idea to get is to get a business loan to finance your business venture. But in real time, the business loan from a conventional bank is not a feasible or realistic approach to getting capital to start a business. Moreover, if a person is able to get a bank loan, it would be based on the person's credit rating, and it wouldn't have anything to do with the merits or feasibility of the business venture. In addition, it's important to research business information in order to understand the process of establishing a business. And the most basic business information that is useful to know is the fact that businesses, for the most part, or at least 85% of businesses fail within the first 5 years. So now that shouldn't present a problem or shouldn't cause fear in your heart to steer you away from getting into business, but it should in fact, instead of frighten you, on the contrary, it should provide some information for you to appreciate the kind of challenges that you would face, and that you should be prepared to deal with the general understanding about the challenges and hazards of starting up a business. So you must prepare a practical plan, and that should be in writing in order to minimize the extent to which these challenges would negatively impact your vision. And in the course of developing a practical plan, it helps you to refine the idea itself and to think about issues that wouldn't normally come up. If you can look at your ideas on paper and consider and reconsider them, as well as to be able to share it with others to get some advice. So it is essential for you to work on exposing yourself in that context to a broader understanding of how business is financed and how black folk generally get into business. And as I mentioned, that is vis-a-vis the bank loan. And the bank loan is what is called debt capital. When you get a loan from a bank to finance your business venture, it's called debt capital for obvious reasons. You're in debt to the bank, and the loan must be paid on a regular monthly basis. So you are therefore in debt before you start the business up. And it would be a very tricky situation, if not an overwhelming situation, for you to grow the business when in fact you have to deal with the debt service as well as to supply whatever immediate finance is necessary for you to move the business forward. No. Not apply for a loan in the conventional sense. But I'm going to touch on that briefly. And I'll close that by saying, so starting up with debt capital is virtually a mission impossible. And that's not how business is generally started up in the first instance.
Right.
That is based on the information that generally is available within the black community and folk who we can think about readily to get information from, and from our general observation as to how we perceive business is started up, or how we heard business is started up. So now there are three other kind of capitals that are important relative to business startup. So the first would be, or the next would be equity capital. A substantial portion of startup businesses are financed by way of equity capital. Equity capital is a term used when the originator of the business or venture offers a percentage of the business venture to a prospective investor. So when a person is looking for an equity investor to help finance the venture, the originator usually plans to keep a majority share of the company while offering 1 to 10% parcels, up to 50% to likely investors. And that is generally how equity capital is approached to develop your startup budget. You are essentially selling shares of the company to investors, and that initial investment provides the initial budget you need to put the business in motion. So it's important to understand, though, that in order to properly introduce a business idea or venture to one or more people, the venture must be reduced to writing. You just can't approach prospective people and rap about this great idea you have. You know, you have to organize it and structure it in such a way that you can leave it with a prospective investor for them to study and perhaps take it under advisement if they desire. But you need to have a coherent plan that can be shared with others, not just something that is in your mind as the originator of the idea. And a big difference is, obviously, if you are dealing with a debt capital scenario, the business idea is generally in your mind, you know, and so you follow through on that, and that is a bad idea from the standpoint of approaching a business venture. So therefore, a business plan must be prepared so that the prospective investor can study the business plan and take it under advisement if they desire to do so. And the business plan should also include a general budget and a financial projection. So that generally covers equity capital. Now, another kind of capital is what's called venture capital. Apart from shopping for an equity partner, an originator of a venture has the option to research venture capitalists. There are companies and individuals that are venture capitalists, and they can be found with just some basic research. And venture capital is perhaps the primary way that startup ventures are financed. But a venture capitalist is someone who you may not know. It's just people who do that, who invest in companies based upon the feasibility of the business project and their particular interests. So, in order to solicit venture capitalists, you must have a business plan already prepared with financial projections for at least 3 years going forward. And venture capital is invested in a project based on the feasibility and merits associated with the business plan. And the originator's credit rating has nothing to do with securing the loan. In fact, credit rating and business development don't go together. Credit rating is associated with a wage earner or an employee. It's not associated with business. And if you have an idea for a business project, and the only way, or you decide to go for debt capital for some strange reason, it would be based on your credit rating. And so it is not wise to even mention to the bank officer that you want to get this loan for a business venture, because you will soundly be rejected. You see, because as far as the banker is concerned, you won't be employed as a result of this business venture. Therefore, they are concerned about how they're going to get paid. You see, and they know that businesses, or 85% of businesses, fail within the first 5 years. They know that. You may not be aware of that, but they know it. So you won't get any bread. You know, you have to contrive something that you are seeking the loan for. Not be excited about sharing this business idea with the banker that you think would inspire them to come off with the loan. So it's about venture capital as one of the most feasible ways to generate capital for a business venture. And the business plan must, again, include financial perspectives, projections, so that a prospective investor can see how money will be earned by the company and when it could be expected to be in the black, because a venture capitalist knows about the 5-year scenario, and generally the payback provision is after 5 years. They generally give you a 5-year lead time in order to realize the project. And so we have debt capital, we have equity capital, and we have venture capital. And there's also angel capital. Angel capital is rare, but there are angel investors out there. An angel investor is generally someone that knows the originator of the project and has confidence in their integrity, ideas, and capacity to execute the plan. The angel is thereby inspired and disposed to investing in the venture. The terms of the angel's investment varies according to the angel and the originator. I had the honor of having an angel investor during the early 1980s who invested $125,000 in my printing and consulting company in Harlem. The investor was in fact an angel that only was interested in enabling my project as an act of appreciation for the efforts I did on the investor's behalf. I had no prior indication that I was in the midst of an angel investor until the point was explicitly made to me as to how I would prefer to be rewarded. Accordingly, the funds were used to buy printing equipment and computers and other relevant material to the business startup. But the larger point is that we need to broaden our information base and make adjustments to our economic and political disposition. If we want to improve politics, such as they are in the Virgin Islands and in the States, we need to broaden our information base relative to political information and how politics is done and how to move from point A to point B. And to what extent does economics play in electoral politics? And to what extent politics can become independent with the infusion of capital from those who seek the political objectives, the specific political objectives. If your political objectives are being financed by folk outside of your community, then obviously there's some limitations to the extent to which your political objectives can be realized. And so the same thing with economics, which is why I wanted to touch on the kinds of capital required to go into business. And so in the course of our conversation, our ongoing conversation, and you brothers could come in anytime with a question or what have you. In the course of that, we're going to be talking about new information, broadening the information base as it relates to politics, and broadening the information base as it relates to business, and how economics and politics intersect, and the need for black folk to begin to control how business or financing of politics intersects. Because there's a lot of tricky stuff going on these beautiful islands. Because we just don't control our politics from a political structural standpoint, as well as from an economic financing standpoint. And so we are not in a position to hold politicians, elected officials accountable. We're not in a position to finance campaigns, and we're not in a position as an electorate to generate a higher level of political sophistication and application, because we're operating on 20th century or 19th and 20th century information and paradigms that have some patent limitations to them, as well as a general leadership that we have inherited as a community of people who seem to be stuck on Politics 101, which is based on the civil rights leadership paradigm, and demonstrations and boycotts and a whole lot of other things. Not that those techniques are not valid. I don't question their validity or application or target application. But the civil rights, we are in a post-civil rights era. So those standard tactics, strategies, and techniques are not relevant to the 21st century needs of black folk in the Virgin Islands or in the States. So the sophistication of 21st century society requires that we make corrections and adjustments to the conventional economic and political paradigm. And we have to understand also that there are no silver bullets. There are no silver bullets that can move us from point A to point B. In fact, I checked with the Lone Ranger. If some of you older folks know, it was the Lone Ranger was the custodian of silver bullets. And so I conferred with the Lone Ranger, and he confirmed that there are no more silver bullets. So that means we have to deal with a process in terms of how we move from here to there. How we will develop in that process the desired outcome. So accordingly, we need to broaden our economic and political information base in order to raise the level of organization and application of grassroots political and economic initiatives. So now, before I forget, let me put a cap on a couple of the points, a couple of the political points we discussed during the last program. Putting a cap on political party politics, and specifically I'm talking about Democrats and Republicans. Now, the two main parties, Democrat and Republican, their current renditions are not as they were in earlier times when they began and were maturing. They are old parties now, and it's important to understand, their transitions. For example, many may know that the Democratic Party, particularly as it is noted in the South, was a very conservative party. And it was conservative to the extent that it had black folk under their heels. They were the KKK party. They were the party of the white supremacists. And that is the nature of the Democratic Party as it was initially constituted, and that is how the party continued up until the 1960s, the mid-1960s, 64 and 65 specifically, with the enactment of the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Act, respectively. And that is known popularly as the Civil Rights period, the Civil Rights era, the Civil Rights movement. But there are many misconceptions as to what the Civil Rights movement actually was. So we're not going to get into the various elements of the Civil Rights movement. We're going to get right into the essence of what the Civil Rights movement was, where it came out of, because it came out of the Democratic Party. And so the Democratic Party at that time, going from the mid-50s, the Democratic Party became embroiled in an internal struggle. An internal struggle because folk were getting sick and tired of what was happening by way of lynching and Jim Crow and so forth and so on. So there was an internal struggle within the Democratic Party that pitted liberals or progressives against the conservative Democrats who ran things. And so the liberals and progressives were astute enough politically to appreciate that there was a political consciousness movement going on in the United States. And black folk in particular were becoming politically conscious and politically aware. And Black is Beautiful and other initiatives within the black community were percolating. As well as on the campus level, blacks and whites became engaged in politics and wanted to play a role in what they saw developing on the political scene. So the white liberals in the Democratic Party were astute enough to interface with the emerging consciousness within the student movement and within the black community and the civil rights movement, who were engaged in trying to beat back Jim Crow. And so there was a marriage between white liberals and progressives and members of the civil rights movement, the youth movement, and so forth. And so within that interface, within that marriage, concepts like integration were developed. Later, concepts like affirmative action were developed. And techniques for organizing minority communities was developed. And the idea of black political leadership was developed. And the civil rights leadership paradigm became what was vogue and acceptable to the Democratic Party. And so there was a precarious marriage between the Democratic Party and the civil rights movement. Now, within that milieu, there was the Black Power movement and the student movement. But the civil rights movement, to put it short, to put it in the capsule, won out over the Black Power movement. Because the Black Power movement, those adherents and participants were positioned as too radical, too militant, too associated with communists or Marxists to be a part of the black leadership paradigm. So the civil rights leadership orthodoxy became the sine qua non for black leadership. And that is what we have today, the leadership group that we inherited based upon how that leadership paradigm was taught to play politics within the Democratic Party. And so there were specific ideas that were floated in the context of that movement, which minimized the extent to which black folk and the civil rights movement would go beyond their democratic benefactors and fraternal leaders. And so that's what you have there in terms of how the Democratic Party transitioned from what it was prior to the 60s and the civil rights movement to what it is now, as popularly termed Friends of Black People. However, we'll talk further on other occasions relative to the limitations of electoral politics, not just the democratic political politics, but electoral politics. Now, the Republican Party morphed as well within that process. The the Republican Party was initially a party of abolitionists, those who were against slavery. And when the Republican Party was founded in 1854, it was a party of abolitionists, and people like Frederick Douglass and others were a part of the Republican Party at that time, and Booker T. Washington and others. But recently, the Republican Party has been positioned, or adherents in the Republican Party have been positioned as Uncle Tom. But we're going to get into that a little bit. We're going to explore that idea a little bit. But it should be noted that black politics had its first heyday during the ascendance of the Republican Party. And black politicians made serious strides that have not been eclipsed by the number of black folk that the Democratic Party has elevated to political or elected leadership. So the black political advances were achieved during the 19th century, during the first civil rights movement that was ushered in by the Republican Party, and that was codified by what is called the period of Reconstruction. And the period of Reconstruction covered about 12 years after emancipation. It covered about 12 years wherein the federal government had federal troops in black communities to enforce the civil rights of black folk. And the period of Reconstruction, or federal troops, were pulled back after the Great Compromise of 1876, when the Republican and the Democratic presidential candidate had a stalemate, and a deal was cut with the Republican candidate, Rutherford Hayes, who would assume the presidency, but the deal was made that he would get the office, but he would have to call back the federal troops that enforce the civil rights of black folk. And so that's what happened during what's called the Great Compromise, and that maneuver enabled Jim Crow and the Ku Klux Klan and all the other white supremacists and reactionists. It enabled them to flourish, and that was the beginning of what we know as the Jim Crow and the age of lynching in the South, which ended with the advent of the civil rights movement, and specifically the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Act. And as President Lyndon Johnson said when he signed the civil rights bills, respectively, that the Democratic Party would henceforth lose the South for at least 40 years. And that's what happened. The Democratic Party lost the South. The Southern Democrats which are called boll weevils. They changed to the Republican Party, and they began a tradition of conservative republicanism. Up until the 1960s, the Republican Party was never conservative. It had become conservative as a result of the successes of the civil rights movement. And now with the advent of the Tea Party, it is sure enough conservative. And what the Tea Party shows you, as well as the history of the transitions of each party from what they were to where they are now, what the Tea Party shows you is that a small group of people who understand how politics works and who are financed sufficiently can take control of a party platform and otherwise control the party. And that's what the Tea Party has done to the Republican Party. And that's what has happened to the Democratic Party. And the larger point here is that we as black folk need to understand that the political party, whoever they are not an enemy or a friend. They are based upon the interest groups that were astute enough and resourced enough and planned well enough to take over the party. And that's what happened with the Tea Party. The Tea Party took over the National Republican Party. And that's how it goes. And they're trying now to take control of various state parties. And in some areas of the country, they are successful with taking over state parties because of how they work with the demographics and do reapportionment and gerrymandering and other voter suppression things. But none of that is peculiar to the Republican Party. Both parties do that, and both parties, as we speak, have not fully embraced the black community. They prefer to use black folk as pawns, numbers. That's all. Numbers. And we have not yet been wise enough to appreciate that we have to do more than just be the fodder for these political parties. We have to look at the process with a little bit more sophistication and realize that there's no silver bullet, that we're going to have to spend time in learning some other stuff, operating some other kind of information, and organizing and planning for years, 2-4 years and more ahead. That's the only way we're going to move from point A to B. So I wanted to put a cap on those particular political ideas and point out the fact of the state of politics in the VI as we speak. We obviously just coming out of a very tumultuous, controversial gubernatorial election, which was my first gubernatorial election as a resident of St. Croix, the Virgin Islands, and so I'm still learning.
I think we all are.
Yes, I remain confounded by some of the stuff that's going on, but for the most part, it points to the fact that we as a territory have to begin party building because the party, the party as it exists, the Democratic Party, which is the predominant party in the VI, just as it is in the States as far as black folks are concerned. We're just one party oriented. But the point is the Democratic Party in the VI is virtually dysfunctional and fragmented. And so party building has to go on in the VI as though it is a brand new process. Although it's going to happen within the parties from the top down, obviously we on the grassroots level have to be suspect of that, and we have to begin our own initiatives from the grassroots up. And so that's the important thing. And perhaps I should also mention, apart from the two standard parties, Republican and Democrat, there are third parties. There are other parties here in the Virgin Islands, just as there are other parties in the States. But now it's important to understand what other parties are essentially about. Now, fundamentally, in the USA, you have two major parties, Democrats and Republicans, and that's what's happening down here as well. But you still have any number of other parties, political parties. And some people always talk about, well, a third party rhetoric is popular from time to time. But the fact is, apart from the two major parties, any additional party is generally considered a splinter party. It's a splinter of one of the two main parties, you see. And so that's what we have in the States, for example. I'm not too savvy on what we have down here. I know there are additional parties in place, and I know there's talk about other parties up and coming. But in New York, for example, we have the Democratic Party, and there's a splinter Democratic Party, the Progressive Party. There's another splinter Democratic Party, the Family and Workers Party. You know, and of course you have the Liberal Party. That's a splinter Democratic Party. And on the Republican side, you have the Conservative Party, which is a splinter Democratic Party. And the Conservative Party is really in control of the conservative, or in some states, they're trying to get control of the conservative wing of the Republican Party. And the way some of the coverage goes, it seems as though conservatives and Republicans are synonymous, but they're not. You know, Republicans are the main party, and the conservative is a splinter party. In some states, they have their own existence, and they fight for ballot status and so forth. But for the most part, the Conservative Party is a splinter of the Republican Party, and that is how they exist on the national level. And they are primarily concerned with national elections, presidential elections, and only state elections in some target states where they have an opportunity to win. So I just wanted to touch on third parties or splinter parties or other parties, because some folk might not be interested in party building in one of the two major parties. Although the party is neutral, it's about the people who infiltrate the party and ultimately control the party. And usually a party or any political entity is not just controlled by one faction. You know, it's one faction and another faction or an opposing faction generally crops up at some point or another within that same party system. And so there's a polarity that develops, a competition, which generally is healthy and it tends to move things forward. So that is the point that I want to make about political parties. And you know, we can go any way we want, but the bottom line is building an effective party in terms of the level of education and registration and organization within a particular geographic area. You know, it's not just different partisan party members, but in order to be effective, we have to begin to have our communities organized, meaning our neighborhood. So if we got X amount of families in our neighborhood or estate, an astute political organization would think in terms of touching base with all of the people in that state and to see to what extent the folk in that estate, how many are eligible to become voters and how many are in fact voters. And you would try to educate and register as many in that estate as possible or feasible, or in a smaller area of the community. But in terms of the process of organizing, it has to go from house to house, and it has to deal specifically with community to community. Obviously, you could have relationships in other communities, other states, and other areas, but the extent to which you can hold elected officials accountable has to do with the extent to which you could concentrate on building your power in a particular demised area. Although there are some other problems, some political structural problems that exist in the VI, wherein the politicians, the elected officials as they are currently constituted, don't represent a particular constituency, other than the fact that it's one district in St. Thomas and another district in St. John and St. Thomas.
St. Thomas, yeah.
Yeah, you know, so apart from that, there should be, like in New York, in the States, for example, you have more of a structural organization that a politician represents. They represent a particular election district or assembly district, you see. And so at some point in the future, the electorate in the Virgin Islands have to think in terms of restructuring the political framework so that politicians, elected officials, can be held accountable. Because you can't hold anybody accountable now. You know, you have 7 elected officials who run against each other, you see, and none of them would be responsible for this or that other than their particular committee assignment. But for the most part, they can wiggle out of whatever they choose to wiggle out of, because there's no way to really hold them accountable. So the people have to take the initiative. We see what the leadership has done and continues to do in front of our face. without any level of sophistication or finesse. You know, it's just blunt force trauma. And so the people have the power once we begin to realize that the power is vested in us, and we begin to organize to achieve a certain outcome. It's not just about blazing or blasting each other, when that might be merited from time to time, but the real mission is about reorganizing our politics and our economics so that we can maximize the extent to which we can grow a new quality of leadership. Because the leadership is not just going to show up, you know, because it's needed. The leadership has to be mentored, and so the people have to stop the tail from wagging the dog and begin to take affirmative action, meaning first person singular, and begin to do some stuff about building a coherent organization that can generate funds for its own development, as well as to develop candidates. And so there are many, many, many ways in which we can begin to approach that. Perhaps, but before I forget, let me just turn back to the economic piece again. Do we have time?
We have about maybe 5 more minutes.
Okay, well, let me just touch on it. I won't be able to get into it too deep. But the point that I want to mention about the economic piece is that apart from the individual inspiration and challenges for us to become business owners and entrepreneurs, in addition to the option of being a wage earner and a professional. Apart from those individual efforts, there are formulations in the United States that I'm sure would be available here as well to help develop and grow businesses. Briefly, during the 70s, for example, you had what was called MESBICs. It's Minority Enterprise Small Business Development. Later on, they had Minority Business something or other corporation. But the point is, there are applications within the federal government that are designed to singularly encourage and facilitate the growth of minority businesses. And it's available, but you have to understand that it's available, and a group of people need to move on it. But what it is essentially is, I'm sure you've heard of tax shelters.
Yes.
Wherein folk, rich people, or people who have capital gains tax, they can shelter their capital gains liability in different formulations. So, for example, within these small business development initiatives, that is a formulation that provides venture capital and startup capital to businesses within a particular community. So now what happens is this formulation can get up to 3 to 4 times the leverage contributed to it through those who are shielding their capital gains tax. For example, if you have this ABC corporation that's designed for what I'm talking about, company Z or person Z can contribute $1 million to that formulation, and that contribution will enable them to shield capital gains. But that formulation, having received that $1 million, they could then, this is a government, they can then get 3 to 4 million based upon that 1 million and make the aggregate available to small business development and growth. And so they have these kind of formulations, which also include what they call a business incubator, so that you have this entity has this capital, and they have a business incubator application, which enables community people who have business ideas and business ventures to come into that incubator and learn through peers and mentors how to grow their business. And within the context of the various incubators, there are services, there are business services that help train entrepreneurs and business owners on how to maximize the extent to which they can build and grow and market their business. So the point that I'm making is, once we begin to think in terms of expanding our ideas of politics and business, there is information available that we can access that will enable us to actualize some of the things that heretofore are prohibitive in terms of us just not having access to the information and the expertise that would be available once you begin to engage on a particular path. So that's probably where I would put the pin in the show tonight, and think in terms of following up on that with some additional information that I would think would be useful going forward. But the objective, of course, is to maximize our politics and business acumen so that we can help transform our immediate situation and circumstance on behalf of those who will be coming behind us quickly.
Very quickly. Yes, our guest tonight is author Gary James. He has a new book. It's Black Politics 2.0. He's on the It's Your Perspective talk show every other Thursday from 8 to, I guess, 9:15 or so.
So the next one is the 20th of December.
20th or the 18th?
I don't know. Is the 18th?
18th, yeah,
Okay.
18th.
All
Yes,
right.
so he will be back on the 18th of December again, every other week. He'll be back to continue on with his conversation. Today was part 3, and next week, 2 weeks from now, will be part 4. That's December 18th, 2014. Thanks again for coming out.
Thank you, Gary.
It's
Always
my
a
pleasure, man. You know, I like to roll with you, brethren.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for
We
coming
like you
out.
rolling with us too, man. So
Thanks for coming out
It's a two-way
and sharing again, your perspective on black politics, and trying to just inform. It's all just a lot of good information that hopefully people can apply it to their lives, make some informed decisions, and just live better.
Right on.
That's how I see it.